Here we are with another Lightroom classic tutorial. In this video, it's all about creating a dark orange-black look for this shot. If you want to follow along, you can find the raw file in the description of the video. And now, without much more talking, let's begin. Here we are in Lightroom, and as always we're going to start in the Basic tab. First off, I'm going to change the profile from Adobe Color to Adobe Landscape, which will just bring up the saturation a little bit, as you can see. And now, to work on the orange look, I am going to use a quite high white balance temperature, so let's just raise it a lot. I want to have a very strong yellow color cast going on before I start with the basic stuff, but that's looking pretty good already. I'm not changing the tint because I don't want to add any magenta to this image, and I think right now it looks pretty decent. Alright, next up we are going to adjust the exposure. It does look quite good already, and you can see looking at this histogram we don't have any under or overexposure. In this case, however, I don't really care that much about that. I do want to start by making this whole shot a lot darker and just bring down the exposure. I'm also going to drop the shadows, and I am going to drop the blacks as well. So due to those settings, we will just get some more attention to the lights of the city, which is exactly what we want. We don't really need that much details in the darkest areas because there isn't much going on anyway. So by applying those adjustments, we just get some mood into this image. However, I do want to introduce some more brightness, especially to the highlights, so I'm going to raise them all the way up. Of course, this will also affect the sky, which now looks kind of ugly, but don't worry about that, we will fix that later with a bit of masking. Besides the highlights, I'm also going to raise the whites, introducing some more brightness to the city lights. Just like that, looks good to me. And finally, I'd want to bring down the contrast very slightly, just to give this image some kind of hazy look. Alright. Next up, I am introducing some texture, which will give the city lights some more sharpness, as well as some clarity. And we could even work with a bit of dehaze. Perfect. And finally, let's bring up the vibrance, and there we have our base adjustments. Let's compare to before real quick. We do have a subtle yellow color cast already. It looks more like a golden hour shot, so that's pretty nice. We do have a lot more contrast going on, and this of course brings more attention to the city lights. All in all, pretty good, but let's now do some masking. First, I do want to work on the sky, and since we have a pretty clear edge here between the landscape and the sky, we can just use the select sky mask. And in here I'm simply going to bring down the highlights in order to control the overexposed parts, just like that. Alright. And since I think the sky could use some more warmth, I'm going to raise the white balance temperature some more in here, just like that. Awesome. Now that's it for the sky. I do want to also work on the foreground just a bit, so here I'm going to use a linear gradient, and I'm just creating a rough one like this. In here I do want to raise the shadows. Let's raise them some more, and I also want to introduce some whites and some clarity. So as you can see, with this linear gradient, I'm not affecting the city on the hill in the background. So I'm just raising the shadows in the very dark spots here in the foreground and on the ocean surface. So that works really good. And that's already it for the masking. Next up, let's head into the tone curve. Since I'm working on a very warm orange look, I'm going to use the red tone curve channel. And I'm picking the point for the highlights. And I'm just dragging it to the left, introducing some more red tones to the highlights. Just about here looks pretty good. I'm not going to overdo it, but I'm really happy here at the moment. Next up, I am completely skipping the HSL settings. I do want to head straight into the split toning. And here is where a lot of the magic is happening with the highlights. Of course, I want a warm color tone on the highlights. So let's first pick a hue. Let's go somewhere here, pretty much in the orange range. And I'm going to boost the saturation all the way up. And this will give us this nice orange vibrant sky, which just fits perfectly for this image. Then for the midtones, again, let's pick an orange color tone, somewhere here. And let's bring up the saturation. Alright, that looks lovely. Next up, the shadows. Here we do want to add some color contrast by introducing a blue color tone to the shadows. So let's see, some in this range maybe. And let's just slightly bring up the saturation. Alright, perfect. The final part of the color grading will be happening in the calibration tab. Here, for this image, I'm just bringing down the red primary hue. And I'm bringing down the blue primary hue. Alright, now let's compare to before again. We are pretty much done with the colors already. It looks really good, really intense. And the orange tones work really good with the dark black and blue tones in here. So what's left to do is the sharpening in the details tab. As always, I'm going to drop the radius, increase the detail, add some masking, and then just bring up the amount of sharpening. And that is about it for the Lightroom editing part. Now, as you can see, there are a few sensor spots which I want to fix using Photoshop because it's just a bit faster performance-wise. Also, I'd like to add a subtle glow over all those city lights, which will also be much easier in Photoshop. So I'm going to right-click on the image and go to Edit in Adobe Photoshop. To fix the sensor spots, I'm simply using the spot healing brush and just brush over all those dots. Also, I'm cleaning up the foreground a bit. Some of those rocks are just a bit distracting. Alright, that looks good to me. Now about the glow effect. In this case, I want to target the highlights of the city lights. I can do that by simply using the TK panel plugin like I usually do for dodging. Now if I go through the lights masks, you can see that's a pretty good selection already, but there's a little too much going on in the sky and in the foreground. So I'm going to use the lights 2 mask. And here we have a pretty good selection for all those city lights. So with the lights 2 active, I'm going to select. Simply hit Ctrl C and Ctrl V to copy and paste the selection. Now when I deactivate the base layer, you can see I still have some selection of the sky left, which I want to get rid of. Now that's pretty easy. I'm going to select the base image. I am going to select, and here I'm choosing sky. With that active selection, I'm going to our glow layer and just hit delete. Once that is done, I can apply the glow effect. Simply go to filter, blur, and here we are choosing Gaussian blur. And you can see I have a pretty high radius. Let's play around with it. I don't want to go too small because that looks weird. So let's raise it a little bit. Right about here seems to be a good spot. So let's hit OK. Now if I turn off this layer, you can see the difference, which is rather subtle, but I really like this effect on this shot. Alright, now if you want, we can further adjust this by setting the blending mode to color dodge. Actually, no, let's go with screen. Not sure if there's a big difference, but I quite like the screen effect here. If you want, you can always duplicate that layer just to make this effect stronger. I, however, don't feel like duplicating it, so let's get rid of that. Alright, and I think that's already it for this editing tutorial. I hope this video was helpful and interesting. If you have any questions left, as always, feel free to ask in the comments, and thank you very much for watching this video.